Once again, here on Talk and Fight from another episode of the Friday Night Panel featuring Lou Eisen, myself, Grumpy Graham. We're gonna actually. What should we talk? You know why? You know why that was important. Lou was just telling me about a fight he was watching involving George Foreman, and the other night I was minutes away, seconds away from watching the movie Big George Foreman.
I loved it.
Yeah, and I didn't get around to watching it. But anyway, you were just telling me about George Foreman. Maybe recap for the fans what you were telling me there.
Well, for the gold medal in '68, he fought Ioannis Shapoulis, Chepulis, and of Russia. Shapoulis had over 300 amateur fights. This was George's 19th amateur fight ever. And Shapoulis was 34, and he laughed at Foreman because he said before the fight, "This is a child. Is this fair? I don't want to hurt a child." And the fight starts, and within a minute, Foreman, who's 220 pounds, lands a right hand and breaks the guy's nose, and blood's gushing. And then he hits him in the mouth, and he knocks out 8 teeth. And the guy looks at his corner like, what's going on here? And then he hits him another right hand, breaks his cheekbone.
Wow.
And Foreman's standing at a distance. The guy didn't know. He's the same height, but if you're fighting with a guy with long arms, you got to get inside his arms. He's giving Foreman punching room, and Foreman is throwing straight right hands and jabs. And, near the end of the first round, there's a standing 8, another standing 8. And in the middle of the second round, the referee did, that's enough. And Shapoulis barely makes it back to his corner, and the blood's gushing like a faucet. They can't stop it. And Cosell says, how on earth did George Foreman not kill Shapoulis?
Wow.
I mean, how did this go more than one round? The fact that Shapoulis is alive is a miracle. I know that communists don't pray to God, but he should find one to pray to. He's lucky he didn't lose his life. And Shapoulis never fought again. He said, it was like getting hit in the head with a crowbar or in the face repeatedly. He said, I've never been hit like that. And Foreman just walked through him.
Wow.
And just beat him to a pulp.
Yeah, I can't believe Foreman was an amateur in '68. That's
yeah. He only had 19 fights. That was his 19th fight. And he learned quickly from Doc Brodus. And when I spoke to him, he said when he was young, he said, I grew up in the 5th Ward in Houston. So he said, I know there's places in Canada in each city that you can't go because they're very rough. And the same in New York, right? And Boston and Philly, there's places you just don't go. But he said 5th Ward was the worst place in all the United States. The cops didn't go there. Mm-hmm. And he said, I was a thug. I beat people up. I stole their money. And one day I was supposed to go to school. I came back and I snuck in through the window. My sister caught me and I felt bad. She said, oh, don't worry about it. You're a loser. We're all losers. We won't be anything. And he said, the problem was I couldn't read. And no one ever taught me to read because, you were black back then. So you're not going to read anyway. So who cares? Sit at the back. And he saw a thing for the Army Corps, for a Job Corps. And he joined. And his mother was sort of against it, but he went to Oregon. And he said to me, because my mother died and my father had a nervous breakdown, I couldn't read either until I was 8 or 9. So he said it was like when he went there, they taught him how to read. And it was like living in a dark room. And then somebody turns on the light and you're saying, I didn't know you could have light. And ever since then, his life, he said, just took off. And he started to like boxing. He said, I wasn't good at the beginning, but I learned quick. And Doc Brodus said to him, the skill will come later. Right now, you've got more power than Sonny Liston, Marciano, and Dempsey put together. There's never, because Brodus had been around for 30, 40 years. So he said, I'd never seen anyone, including Liston, punch like that, where he could hit a guy and, break his jaw and his cheekbone with one punch. Or he'd hit a guy once in an amateur fight, with a right to the chin, and the guy would just leave, get out of the ring. I've had enough. And he did that. And he hit this Sapoulis guy a right hand to the stomach, and the guy's legs buckled. And Foreman's jab, the guy's head kept snapping back and back, and the blood's just gushing out. And Foreman's covered in the guy's blood. Just beat the hell out of him. And he did that to every opponent that year.
Was this on black and white television sets back then?
Color TV they had back then, so black and white and color. But people couldn't believe it, that here was this kid, an inexperienced kid, and just goes up against these veterans from the communist countries, and they're looking at him laughing, and he lands that first punch, and then their eyes are like, oh my God. Now what is this? Has he got a hammer in his hand? He's just so strong.
Incredible. Speaking of the heavyweights and speaking of old heavyweights, are you following the news with respect to the big fight in Jamaica? Razor Ruddock and James Toney?
Yeah, that's sad. I mean, I know Razor needs me, which is unfortunate, but I don't think on his, that shouldn't be allowed. They're in their 50s. Someone's going to get hurt.
Well, even I wish Tim was joining us. Maybe he will. He usually pops in late, but he's been training for a fight. I don't know if it's an well, it will be an exhibition match, I'm sure, but and even Francois Boeta down in South Africa, he's talking of re-entering the ring to become the oldest African heavyweight champ that ever was. So it's a thing. It's a thing.
It'll happen until someone gets killed or has a heart attack. I mean, Tim Witherspoon has nothing to prove. He got to be world champion.
Right.
I'll never say that. Most people will never say that about anything. I can never say I was the best in the world about anything, except being a schmuck, or an idiot. But other than that, I can't. I'll never be able to say that. But he can say I was the best fighter on earth in my weight class. And Roy Jones could say that. But Ruddock can punch. But I mean, I don't know why they're doing this now. It's time to walk away.
Yeah, you'd think just their name value alone would attract attention to a specific event.
Right.
If they're, because first of all, I can't believe it's happening in Jamaica. Like I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of people they're expecting, but I can't really expect there's that much interest, having been to Jamaica quite a lot. We had our office located in Jamaica for a number of years in Kingston. Boxing is just not that popular in Kingston.
Well, it sounds like almost like a PBC fight, because PBC is matching Andre Berto in his 40s against Robert Guerrero in a rematch from a fight they had 11 years ago. And as my friend Rick Glazer said, this is why nobody wants to do a TV deal with them or respects them. You're going to actually put this on TV and charge money for this. No one cares. They're way past their primes, and they shouldn't be in the ring.
Right.
It's ridiculous. The thing this week that really annoyed me but didn't surprise me is the IBF pulling recognition of Bud Crawford as welterweight champ.
Right.
And, as I said before, all these sanctioning bodies, specifically the IBF, is run by organized crime. And they knew he had a rematch clause with Spence. Otherwise, he doesn't get to fight. And because he won't fight Jerome Boots Ennis, he said, I'd like to, but I can't now. I got to honor the rematch clause or I get sued and lose. Well, then we're pulling our title. And to me, that means the IBF title is worthless. And when I look at the WBA, which I said the other week stands for Without Brains Attached, at the behest of the mob, they pulled the heavyweight title from Ali because he changed his name. In 64, they pulled the title after he won it. So, the IBF was like, sorry, you got to fight our guy, and you got to do it when we do it, and we don't care about previous. IBF are criminals. There's so many of their executives that are in prison, and they're the only sanctioning body that the United States government or the FBI can do something about because they're based in New Jersey. They can close them down. These guys are just flat out underworld hoodlums who are, it doesn't matter what they do because Crawford's the best welterweight on the planet.
Yep. But after he fights Errol Spence, I'm sure he's planning on moving up a few weight classes because he wants to take on Canelo, right?
Right. And he's much more skilled than Canelo. Mayweather is smaller and easily beat Canelo. But, I think Spence, it's going to have, he can't make 147. So he says, I want to fight at 154 against Crawford. But Crawford said, I won. It's not your call. It's my call. And so for Spence to go up like that, I think skill-wise, he could beat Canelo, and I think he could beat Jerome Boots Ennis. But as Ali said, titles are won and lost in the ring, not in boardrooms. And the IBF just demeans, if it's even possible, demeans their brand even more. It's terrible.
Well, I'm sure Boots is pretty happy about the decision.
He's a great fighter, but he hasn't beaten the world champion. In the earlier 60s and for the early part of the 70s, there was one world champion each weight division. So Boots Ennis, if this was the 60s, would be a great contender. He'd be number one. Wouldn't be champion unless he beat Crawford. But now IBF said, we'll just give it to you. And Crawford's got a huge fan base.
Right.
And that's a stupid thing for the IBF to do.
I think if I remember correctly, the problem that Bob Arum had with Crawford is he wouldn't do any interviews or didn't do proper media
right
in order to promote his fights. I think that was the issue. That was only like a year or two ago that was all happening. Right. So I don't know what really changed his attitude, but nonetheless, I was looking forward to seeing if he'd pick up that gauntlet, so to speak, and fight Boots Ennis, because we've been talking about Boots for a while now on this channel. We've been on. No, he is absolutely. So,
but his last fight, they said he looked off. He was only brilliant. His last fight, he wasn't Superman. So right. Give him a break. I don't think Crawford's going to knock him out. I think Crawford could beat him, but it's silly. Why can't the IBF say? Why can't he say, "Listen, I'll fight your guy. I'm going to fight Spence in December, and then I'm going to fight your guy 3 months later."
Right.
And how's that? And the IBF could go, sure. But they just said, nope, you got to fight him first. We don't care what the other sanctioning bodies say. And this happens in every weight class, and boxing can't afford to lose fans.
That's absolutely true, and something that I was talking about on my news program this morning, in fact, because again, Jake Paul has picked another excellent opponent, a boxer this time, but another excellent opponent that's sure to drive his fans wild. But the point is that those fans, if there's a million of them, he's got something like 20 million. What do you call them? Fans, let's call them. Jake Paul is a very popular fella. So if he can bring 1% of that into the boxing world in terms of new fans, that's a good thing for boxing in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fellow who he's picked, I can't remember his name, Andre something. Point is American fighter. He's a real boxer, though, in his 30s. But nonetheless, I mean, here's Jake Paul. He's picked himself another decent but unknown fighter. So,
well, Mike Coppinger, who writes on ESPN, had a great comment. He said Jake Paul is fighting more often than world champions are today, and that's a sad commentary in boxing. We can't get world champions in the ring against each other, and this guy, public, is on his fan page saying, why don't you fight this guy? Okay, I will. And other guys they won't fight each other. And he said it's sad commentary in boxing. And there's so much, as you know, with MMA and so many sports, there's only so much money people have to spend. Right. And, I've had friends of mine who said to me, I don't know who the champions are, Lou, and I don't care. Because if the guy wins a title tomorrow night, they're going to strip him of it in a month for whatever reason. Because he didn't have a salad with his dinner, or for some stupid reason. Right. And my friend said, I wouldn't watch it for free. You couldn't pay me to sit and watch a boxing match. Yes, they're exciting, but the politics is so distasteful. I don't want anything to do with it.
One of the things that we've often talked about as well. Happy to hear your thoughts on this, but if I lived in Pittsburgh, if I was a baseball fan, I'd be cheering for the Pirates. If I was a hockey fan, I'd be cheering for the Penguins. If I was a football fan, I'd be cheering for the Steelers. But boxing's not set up like that.
No.
If we had leagues as opposed to these organizations, I think I'd rather see a Toronto-based boxer, no matter what his record, go up against say a Montreal-based boxer or
Right.
Boston-based boxer.
Right.
And I really think the passion would be more inclusive in that respect.
I agree. And it's funny you mentioned this, and this is not a setup. We didn't plan this. This is a Toronto-based boxer. I happened just to find his book, Sammy Lovespring. And he was the number 1 ranked welterweight in the world in the 1940s until they got thumbed in the eye accidentally by Steve Belois and lost his eyesight. And when he was fighting here, being Jewish, he fought Frank Genovese, who was Italian. And the gardens would be full, of Italians and Jews cheering for their man. And Sammy fought here for a while, but like a lot of fighters here, he said, I'm fighting for less and less each fight. I get less money as the Canadian welterweight champion than I did before I won it. So he had to move to New York and sign with Al Weil, who promoted Rocky Marciano, Henry Armstrong, Lou Ambers. He said, I had to sign with him. Then I was making real money in boxing. He said, you can't in Canada. But back then, to your point, there were, Toronto neighborhood fighting a guy from a Jewish neighborhood fighting a guy from Italian, or Montreal guy like Robert Cleroux, the heavyweight, fighting Toronto's George Chuvalo. And in New York, they had Brooklyn's best fighter, fighting guys from the Bronx. And Montreal is one of the few places I know that used to do that, where they build up hometown fighters. And Pittsburgh built up Billy Conn, Charlie Burley, and they were known as Pittsburgh fighters. So you came to Pittsburgh and you fought them, or Emilio Bettina, the light heavyweight champ. You better be good because you're on their home ground. And if you make a mistake, you're going to lose. But they don't do that anymore. Now it's, like you said, sanctioning bodies, greed. We don't care where you're from. We make the rules.
And on a financial level, it was interesting to see Frank Warren's comments with respect to the pay-per-view numbers, Fury versus Ngannou. There was only roughly, he claimed, 60,000 pay-per-views. And when someone asked him in this public interview, why don't you care about the U.S. audience? He said, well, we don't care about the U.S. audience. We planned that fight to be timed to accommodate the British fan base. So it's interesting to see, and our favorite Eddie Hearn is always going off about all Brit fights. So until these guys release or are released of their control of the sport, I'd rather put the fans first and bring local fighters versus local fighters, and if that requires forming league, I think that's what's necessary. Frankly.
Yeah, I agree. And what Frank Warren said and Hearn, I mean, it's stupid because financially it makes no sense. So do you want to go to Joe Smith's bank, or do you want to go to the Royal Bank of Canada, the top bank? You want to turn away an audience of 350 million potential viewers and go to an island like Britain, where the viewership is not even a tenth of that? That's stupid. The money's in the States. That's why the sanctioning bodies want to have most of their fights there. Or they've had fights in Germany where you get 80 or 90,000. But you have to, Ali Foreman was catered to the audience in the United States. And, on my Once Upon a Time in the Prize Ring blog, I'm writing about a guy from 1919, 1929, Carl Tremaine from Perth, Ontario, at bantamweight. And they asked him, why'd you move to Cleveland? He said, because at the time there were 180 million Americans, there were only 5 million Canadians. It's much more money, much bigger audience. I can't keep fighting in Canada for $175 a fight. I'd rather fight in the States and make $15,000 to $20,000 a fight. That just makes more sense. And it's not that they don't want to pay me that in Toronto or Hamilton. They just don't have the money.
Well, not much has changed.
No, it hasn't. Boxing's been mismanaged in Canada for well over 100 years. In Ontario, it's bad because the amount of tape and gauze on your hands. The rule hasn't changed in 100 years, literally, and they won't listen. And they hired non-boxing people of very low experience, bureaucrats, to get in there and run it. And you have few shows because people are tired of putting up with the BS. I mean, it's completely mismanaged. They don't give they don't give UFC any problems, but even the UFC doesn't come to Canada much anymore because they don't want to put up with the Ontario Athletic Commission. They said it's not worth the grief. You know, these people are idiots, and usually you wouldn't say that even if you felt it, but they said, "What's the point? You can't reason with them. Can we discuss this?" No. Well, can my lawyer speak to you? No. Fine, then we don't need you. You know, and that hurts boxing. The Ontario Athletic Commission has to be one of the worst athletic commissions ever founded in the history of professional sports, going back almost 200 years. They're entirely clueless.
Well, I'd have to say there was that 10-year reign of terror that Ken Hayashi certainly made his mark. And
he deliberately did that. He deliberately went after boxing and asked for people, you know, well, you're going to have to do this. I spoke to him when I worked for Lennox Lewis, and he would call me up. Listen, you bastard, you son of a bitch. And I said, Mr. Hayashi, I'm the head of PR. I don't know why you're calling me. But second, if you said that to me in public, I beat the crap out of you. What gives you the right to call me up and be rude like that? How does that get you somewhere?
Right.
You know, and he didn't care that he was hated. And I heard him speaking to Les Woods, who ran it, and Global Legacy Boxing, and just the way he swore at him and cursed at him. And you're not allowed to have 17 fights. And Les said, we don't. There's 6 fights on the card. You're lying. No, I have the contract that your lawyer sent over. No, we're not supplying referees for 17 fights. And Les looked at me and I said, just hang up on him. You know, I mean, Ken Hayashi was a liar and incompetent, and would go to New York for the New York Boxing Commission, where he'd be comped with women, and I mean, he was just incompetent, hated boxing, and was just a person. Instead of being nice to people, it went to his head, and he went out of his way to upset and hurt people. And you could hear him on tapes speaking to MMA promoters in boxing that he wanted I got to pay more money for this, more money for that. Not according to the provincial statute. Well, I say you do. And I'd work in an office full of lawyers. And I'm going to tell you something. If this was the 30s or 40s, he would have been shot. You know, the mob that controlled boxing here in the 30s and 40s and in the 50s, they wouldn't have put up with that. And they didn't have that problem in New York because they had their own people on the commission in New York. You know, but here they just would have got rid of them. But we don't do that anymore. I'm not saying we should, but Hayashi got away with murder. He was the worst athletic commissioner in the history of sport anywhere, ever.
Having said that, with I mean, there's not many fights going on this weekend that I've been following. Have you followed any?
I've been looking at some, but I couldn't find any of any worth that I thought, oh, I know these guys. I'll watch this.
There's the only one I found is happening tomorrow night. Shabazz Massoud versus Jose San Martin, super bantamweight WBA Intercontinental title. That's it.
Yeah, I couldn't find any other one either. And as we've been saying for weeks, these intercontinental titles, it means nothing to the regular person at home who wants to watch boxing.
Right.
I don't care about an intercontinental title.
Right. I mean, it's being held in Newcastle in England, promoted by Matchroom. It's on DAZN. I have to wonder how much they're charging. But it was interesting to see actually what the Jamaicans or whoever's promoting that fight were charging. I think it was $19.99 US to watch Tony and Ruddock go at it.
You know, the way they talk and the way Tony can be, they could just have a fight without putting it on pay-per-view. You could just put those two in a room. And Tony would say, you know, you're lucky I'm even talking to you because your skill level is nothing compared to mine. You just have one punch. And you got to remember, Tony walked around at 200. He had to get down to 160 for his fights.
Oh,
And so Tony's the much more skilled fighter than Ruddock. And I can't see Ruddock landing a punch on Tony.
the picture of them at the weigh-in when they're facing each other, they are huge fellows at their age. They are huge.
I mean, as in muscles or fat.
Bit of both, I would argue.
Yeah.
You know, they definitely look like, I hate to say it, but as opposed to say when we looked at the pictures of Mike Tyson last weekend or the weekend before, when he was showing off his rather ripped physique. These two fellows don't look what we call ripped. You know, they look like a couple of 50-year-olds.
Yeah, and Tony's he smokes cigars. He's addicted to cigars. He has his own brand. So he's a chain cigar smoker. I don't know how that's going to affect him. But, if you square up against him, you're not going to be able to hit him.
Actually, I wonder who's on the undercard. Maybe on the undercard, Abel Mendoza, Aristides Perez, Jermaine Bowen, Tsitsi Davis.
Isn't that Noriega on the undercard?
Oh, wait a sec. DJ Ruddock is on the undercard. Maybe that's Donovan Ruddock's son.
Yeah, it could be.
And he's facing Huzier Heron. And then there's Richard Holmes fighting Jose Julius. So that's it. Oh, it's $29.99 to watch.
And is that tomorrow?
When the heck is that? It doesn't actually say. No, it doesn't say what it is.
That's good promoting.
Anyway, the pictures here. I can't. It's on Fight News. Anybody will help.
I saw one picture of them. Just, they look angry, but the fans will be angry. I mean, the fact that they're charging for this is ridiculous. They can't be making a lot of money, either fighter. Tony doesn't need the money. I know that.
Really?
Yeah, and he's in the gym every day, training guys. So, whenever you put Tony in a room with another fighter like Antonio Tarver, and Tony just said, "You're lucky I didn't fight you. I would have put you in a coffin," rather than, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you." And Tarver said, "Are you kidding? I knocked out Roy Jones. He beat you easily. I would have destroyed you. I'm 6'3". You're not."
Right.
And he said, you could be 7 feet tall, Antonio. You ain't going to land on me. Not going to happen. Not once.
Well, if we have nothing else to talk about, we may as well go watch the Leafs game.
Well, yeah, it's always fascinating to me when there was this is, I guess, concerns hockey. So years ago, there was an urban legend in Toronto that Bob Probert went into a gym in the 1980s and challenged George Chuvalo to a fight. And that they got in the ring and Probert did all right until George hurt him. And so I asked George if that was true. And he said, "I don't even know who that is." You follow hockey? I followed the Leafs and I watch who they play. I say he plays for Detroit. Well, I've been to the Gardens. I've seen Detroit play, but I don't know who Bob Probert is. And I said, well, he's this big, he's a goon. He's 6'4", 6'3". And George went, he said, the mistake people make is goons fight for 30 seconds to a minute.
Right.
We're used to fighting for 15 rounds. Right. Or you can't grab a guy and pull a shirt over his head.
Right.
Would have been a headlock. You got to just use your fists and your knowledge of the sport. And he said, I've never seen a hockey player do that. And I saw Nathan Perrott of the Leafs. I think I told you before a fight, he was fighting at the old Mississauga Center, the Don Cherry Center.
Yep.
And I was talking to him. And he said, yeah, I used to fight 15, 16 years ago. Why would you do this now? Well, I retired from hockey. Right, but you can't just pick up boxing. Why not? I said, well, in about 22 minutes, you're going to find out. And he got hammered by a guy who's something like 0-6. This happens all the time, and it's interesting when you see fighters skip steps. I'm reading a book now by my friend Joe Body about Arturo and Joe Gotti. And it's interesting how, Joe Gotti didn't like how he's being pushed by main events, and he didn't like Luduva, and he didn't like this, and he didn't like that, and of course made the mistake of quitting, and then he signed with Don King. King says, your first fight's with Terry Norris, which is not the guy you want to be fighting, And of course, Norris knocks him out in the first round, or second round, I think, and just destroys him, and he was never the same again. And he was supposed to fight Gianfranco Rossi, the most boring fighter that ever lived, and he could have beaten him. But King said, no, you got to fight Norris first. And then, he felt bad about leaving the main events, and they said, hey, you did it. You chose to quit, not us. So, you got to give people credit for knowing what they're doing. And this was just a guy Don King wanted to steal out of spite. And Gotti had talent. He was a great fighter, Joe Gotti. But, got the wrong fights at the wrong time. Whereas Arturo got the right fights, but Arturo also could punch 3 or 4 divisions above his own weight. I mean, there's very few people like that. I don't know of many Canadians right now in any weight division that I would look at and say, this guy's got a chance, or that guy's someone to look at, other than Ryan Rozicki.
Right.
I think he's a great fighter.
Yep, he does have a chance, and they're doing a great job of. I know there's a different way of using the word promote, but they're promoting him very well, quite frankly.
Yeah, and they're bringing him along at the right speed, and he's a tough guy. I mean, he's got great balance. He can take a tremendous shot because his balance is so good, and he's very powerful. He's never out of a fight. No fighter can face him and think, well, it's the 10th round. He'll be tired. I can go after him. That's a mistake. Because if he catches you with one good shot, he's heavy-handed in both hands, and he carries that power through all 12 rounds. And he should be a household name in Canada.
Yes, he should. We've certainly talked about him a lot on our various shows, and he's worthy of that talk, by the way.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to watch. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, because I think the last time he was fighting down in Niagara Falls and put on a great show. I think he's fighting next in Nova Scotia, which I think is where he's from, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so I look forward to, I'm curious if he's unbeaten.
I think he lost once to Oscar Rivas in Montreal.
Okay.
But gave Rivas a pretty good beating. I know that, in Nova Scotia, I've always said Nova Scotia could have its own boxing Hall of Fame. They don't need the rest of Canada because look at all the great fighters that came out of there. Sam Langford, the greatest fighter probably that never won a title that ever lived.
Right.
George Dixon's from Nova Scotia. Mysterious Billy Smith, the world's first welterweight champion, is from Nova Scotia. And just all these fantastic fighters that came out of there. Clyde Gray, Chris Clark. I mean, these were world-class and world champion fighters. And most Canadians don't know them, and they should be on our stamps, but they're not.
Huh. There was a great fighter we interviewed a couple of times, Scotty Olson. I don't think he's from the East Coast. I think he's from the West.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, but he's great talking to these fellas. When they recount their challenges in growing up in a Canadian system that doesn't really support them, and then trying to enter into a very competitive U.S. space. And the scenario hasn't changed much, I must say.
No, and it's sad. I was at the Hall of Fame one year when Michael Carbajal was there, and we were in this back room at a restaurant which no longer there called Graziano's. And I was sitting with Marvin Hagler and George Chevallo and Angelo Dundee and Terry Norris and a couple of people. And Carbajal was there. And I'm talking to George and Angelo about Scotty Olson. And he fought Carbajal. And Carbajal said, he's a racist and a bigot. He called me a sand nigger and he called me this. And I'm actually a Latino and he this and that. And I said, you're drunk and you're lying. I said, I know Scotty. I've never even heard him curse.
Right.
And I've known him for 30 years. So he's not a racist. He isn't. He's the nicest guy on the planet. Yep. And he would never demean any opponent before, after, or during a fight. You're just drunk and you're lying. And he stands up. You want to go? And George Chuvalo stands up and looks at him and says, "You're going to go through me first. I got no problem with you. I love you." And Adler grabs Carbajal and says, "You know what, Michael? I think it's time to go to your room and you go to bed. I think it's enough." But Carbajal, I found out 6 months later, lost all his money to his brother, who stole it all. So Carbajal was drunk at like 7 a.m. He was hammered.
Wow.
A hard time. But I just said, why would you badmouth? Of all the people you want to badmouth in boxing, why Scotty Olsen? He's nice to everyone.
So, speaking of impairment and boxing, a couple of interesting stories popped up on my radar this week. One was Jared Anderson.
Yeah, I saw that.
Heavyweight hopeful got popped by the police down south. I think he was drinking and driving, but also had some weed in his car. And then was it Shakur Stevenson who then came out and said, who had a fight taken away? Might have been Shakur. Anyway, next thing you know, here's Anthony Joshua talking about his days as a teenager smoking weed. So I'm saying to myself, wow. First of all, I didn't realize the extent, if you will. Now, I don't know if it's a banned substance or not, but there was that professional snowboarder years ago from Canada who won the gold medal.
That's right. Out west.
Ross Rigbliadier.
Yeah, that's it.
And he wins his gold medal, obviously high, but he won the gold medal. Now you're going to strip a guy from smoking a joint, going down it. Now, anyway, bring it back to Anthony Joshua. So Anthony Joshua's advice was, hey, man, listen, do what you do when you're a teenager, but get over it and stop it. It's not going to help your career. You need to focus. And that was his advice. It was good advice. But, targeting a guy like Jared Anderson, what the heck is Jared Anderson thinking?
Well, he obviously needs to be looked after more. Joe Gotti said in the book on him that him and his brother Arturo were left alone for months at a time. And it's like, we're from Montreal, so our first language is Italian, our second is French. So you're leaving us down here in New Jersey. You're not inviting us for Thanksgiving dinner. You're not checking in how we're doing. Do we need anything? I mean, you can't do that with a boxer. Boxers get in trouble. We need to be checked in on. We need to be focused for a fight or focused on something else. And his management team should not have allowed that. The thing about Ross Ribigliati, which kills me, is pot's is not a sports enhancing drug.
Right.
Not a performance.
That's my point.
Yeah. So it would, if anything, hurt your chances to win a gold medal.
Right.
And to win a fight. But in the States, there's such a dramatically different attitude. Because when you look at Johnny Tappy, he had a lot of problems with cocaine. But the system in the States, in Albuquerque and all over, was if you do cocaine, you're a criminal and you need to be in prison. In Canada, it's if you sell cocaine and traffic it, you're a criminal. If you take it, then you have a problem and you need medical help. But they don't look at it that way in the States. And they won't listen to it. So in the movie Cinderella Man, there were actors that I became good friends with, but they were from the United States. And when one actor said that he just smoked a joint, this other Canadian actor, this other American wouldn't talk to him. You're a criminal. And he said, well, it's not really being a criminal. I just smoked a joint. I'm fine. I smoked it. I lied down for an hour and a half. 2 hours later, they called us to set. Well, that's being a criminal. Not being a criminal. I don't sell it. I don't smoke around kids. I'm single. I just smoked a little bit on my own. But this guy who was right-wing Republican just couldn't get it out of his mind. It's no different than doing heroin. And I said, listen, I don't smoke pot. I used to a lot when I was younger. I kept a lot of countries alive. And I said, people that do heroin don't do pot.
Right.
Two different highs. And people that do pot don't want to touch heroin. They don't mix. So I said, you don't know what you're talking about, but you are a right-wing Republican. And so all drugs are bad. And there's a difference. There's a level. So I said, look at it this way. More people are killed drinking alcohol and driving than are smoking pot and driving.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but he's not a criminal for smoking a joint.
No. And not not
happy.
not too many guys are going to be getting off the couch after smoking a joint to go rob the corner store. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no one is going to actually want to engage in a fight. I'm
That's
just
right.
going to sit here and watch. When I was a comic, the thing I would do with other comics after smoking a joint, our favorite thing, honestly, was watching Foghorn Leghorn on Looney Tunes. You made that roll out in red, turn white and blue. Red, white, and blue. That's a joke, son. Flag waver. I keep pitching him. He keeps missing him. Got to keep your eye on the ball. Eye, ball. That's a joke, son. Get it? So we would love that, but we didn't do it around people that didn't want to do it. You know,
Right.
it was a closed group. Fighters, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. was doing it when he was getting ready for a fight, and his father, and they show the video, throws his hands up, and he just said, "I don't care if you do it after a fight, but you got to fight in 2 weeks. What are you doing?" And you know, I mean, pot's the least of the drugs these guys are doing.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and the performance enhancing drugs they have now and the ones that are coming are undetectable. So, you know, you don't know which boxers. I mean, Juan Manuel Marquez, when he knocked out Manny Pacquiao, he looked like a middleweight almost. And the guy he trained with had been in prison for selling performance enhancing drugs. So, I mean, who knows? And, you know, guys, Graham always blamed Manny Pacquiao. Oh, Manny's juiced. But Manny was never juiced. He had volunteer drug tests anytime, day or night, all the time, several times a week, every week. Sure, take some blood. Sure, take my urine. Check the food, anything. He didn't hide anything from anyone. And so people would say, well, how can he come up from flyweight and be a world welterweight champion? And I said, well, Jimmy McLaren did it in the 30s. No one asked him if he was taking drugs. He did it gradually over time.
Take a look what happened with Conor Benn. Actually, that's still unresolved.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, he did it. He won't admit it. And he shouldn't be given a license.
Yeah. I forget who is it Chris Eubank Jr. who?
Yeah, that's who he's supposed to fight.
That blows me away that United Kingdom's authority, they take it away from him. They tell him he's been doing drugs. He says, "Oh, I've been eating too many eggs," something like that, whatever. And next thing you know, Eddie Hearn's got him a fight lined up.
Yeah, Eddie Hearn doesn't care. None of these guys care. It's when Margarito had his gloves loaded against Mosley and got caught, Mosley was furious because Bob Arum, their promoter of both guys, sided with Margarito. He should still be allowed to fight in the States. And Mosley's manager said, but he loaded his gloves. He could have killed my guy. That's illegal. Well, but I'm not going to go against him. He's one of my fighters. But you should go against him. What does he have to do? Kill somebody? You know, so when you look at the performance enhancing drugs, I mean, Eddie Hearn doesn't care. What does he care? It's just another hurdle to get over. But it allows your muscles, as you know, to recover quicker. And it's ridiculous that, and the main thing in all performance enhancing drugs, the main thing, what the law says around the world, regardless of what country you're in, you're responsible for what goes into your body. And that's just it. Maybe the eggs did have performance enhancing drugs, but you took them willingly. You could have said, no, they may have performance enhancing drugs. I won't eat them. But you did that. Same with Canelo and the meat. You're responsible. You tested positive. And Ben tested positive, 3 samples. You're guilty. Don't make it worse. Say, I'm guilty. I did it. I'm sorry. I'll try not to do it again.
And to your point, you know what? At the end of the day, the fans don't really care either. They just want to see a good fight. But I do feel sorry though for those guys who do take the performance enhancing drugs because his opponent maybe is clean as a whistle.
Yeah.
And you know, it's unfair to the opponent, quite frankly. Now, I'm just saying the fans just want to see a good fight.
Right. It's unfair to the fans. And ultimately, look at Lyle Zato, football player, went into boxing.
Yep.
He died from taking performance enhancing drugs.
Huh.
Brain cancer.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he had an exhibition with Ali, and he got some punches in. But as he said after, Ali was gracious enough not to take my life. He allowed me to go to distance. He promised he wouldn't hurt me, and I don't know what I'm doing. But before he died, he said my oncologist said this: your cancer is from performance enhancing drugs. You kept taking them for a long time. We kept warning you, and this is what happens. You can't do it. And he did it, and he paid the ultimate price. And a lot of these athletes after, you don't see them after, and when the performance enhancement goes away, they don't take the drugs. Look what happens to them.
Right. Circling back around to what we were talking about with respect to Bob Probert, for those boxing fans who are watching, he was a hockey player who fought an awful lot, and who died as a result of brain injuries he sustained, and he donated his brain, um, so researchers could study the effects of concussions. Quite frankly, there's a big research institute here in Toronto that study. It's actually co-funded by Ron Ellis, actually. I forget what it's called, but anyway, they don't actually want the involvement of the boxing industry, because I offered it, not my own services, but I'm just saying, would you like someone from the boxing industry on the board, even to advise? And they said no. So I still think there's a boxing gets a bad rep.
I think there's more to it than that, though, Graham. I think because hockey players, the NHL refuses to pay out, and they're aware of it. But you're right, boxing does get a bad rep because who would know better? And hockey fights, as you know, a lot of times the helmet comes off. Certainly in Ron Ellis's days, 60s and 70s, even Probert's early days, they didn't have to wear helmets.
Right.
So it's just your fist against a skull, and a guy like Probert is 6'4", 240, could kill a guy. And
Right.
even though he's winning fights, he's taking a lot of punishment. And Eric Lindros's brother, who I apologize to, I can't remember his
Brett.
Brett Lindros. That's right. Thank you. Great guy. And Brett played for the Islanders. The Leafs were supposed to draft him, but the Islanders screwed the Leafs. And Brett played, I think, a season and a half, got 4 or 5 concussions.
Yep.
Right. And the doctor said, next time's your last one, just die. And
Right.
he had to quit. He said, my life is more important than getting another concussion. And these guys that get concussions, they're never the same. Again, Terry Evanston, if this Canadian Football League, was never the same again. So are a lot of these NFL players and boxers. And I look at the guys in Joe Body's book about the Gotti brothers. Graham, he's talking about fighters from the last 20 years that aren't the same anymore. And you look at guys, I mean, it's just terrible. Ended up destitute, broke, and so many of them. They're broke because they didn't know how to keep their money. They spent all their money and got too much damage. No one cared enough about them. And once they lost the title, all the leeches left.
You know who's stepping 1 inch closer to that line is Deontay Wilder.
Yes.
And I believe he suffered a concussion when he fought Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's dad, although I don't really like what he says most of the time, but he did say that Deontay Wilder had his skull cracked open like an egg or something like that.
Yeah.
So I really do think that Deontay Wilder should hang up the gloves and do something else. But now, I don't know if you saw this week, he says he's willing to put on 4-ounce gloves to take on MMA fighters. I mean, he is really risking his life, is my point.
Yeah, that's desperation. When you have a guy who's 6'9", 289 pounds hitting you in the head repeatedly, it's going to do damage, if not kill you. And the damage is lasting. Ferdy Pacheco, Muhammad Ali's doctor, when I spoke to him, said, I said, I wish Ali, he goes, I've heard it before. You wish he would have quit after the Frazier fight in Manila. You wish he would have quit after the Foreman fight. And he said, Lou, I told him to quit after the first Frazier fight. because his speech was affected then.
Right.
And then in training camps, he would lie on the ropes and let the sparring partners hit him. And he would say, well, I'm building up my body, like my organs, like when you play guitar. And he said, Muhammad, you don't build up your organs you don't toughen them by taking punches to your kidney and liver and your brain. You just damage them. Playing guitar, you get calluses on your hands. Right. Your skin is an organ, but your fingers aren't organs. You're just hurting yourself. It's time to call it quits. But then with Ali, they stole almost 4 years out of his life. So he was trying to get it back. But you're right, Graham. These guys should have to go do testing. But a long time ago on the show, months and months ago, I couldn't remember the guy's name. There was a fighter in Australia who was in a coma for months, and he owned a gym. And he got out of the coma. He went back into his own gym to box and spar, and finally they had to arrest him. And the local government in Australia, whatever city, forced him to sell his gym. And they said, if you try to enter a boxing gym, we'll charge you with a crime. You suffered a coma and a brain bleed. You know, you're eager to kill yourself. We can't allow that. And the same with Deontay Wilder, same with Errol Spence. Errol Spence isn't the same.
That's right.
You know, and there's guys that you see. No one who fought Joe Louis was the same. And people think that sounds so cool because Louis is great. But mentally, they were never the same after Louis knocked him out. And the guy that I mentioned, Foreman, knocked out, Ionis Shapoulis, he went quickly downhill mentally. And that was from 2 rounds. That was less than 6 minutes of a 6'3" guy, 225 pounds, bashing him in the head. No headgear back then, with 8-ounce gloves, and Foreman must have landed 75, 80 punches. No one can take a shot like that.
That's right.
You know, no one, as Angelo said to me, no one gets out of boxing unscathed, right? It caught up to Chevalo, and he had the best chin of all time, and eventually caught up with George. And, you know, George put a big hurt on Doug Jones, and Doug Jones was never the same. George put a big hurt on Corey, and Corey was never the same. Corey had a terrible ending. So did his brother Mike, and same with Floyd Patterson. So you're talking about elite level fighters don't get hit that often and still end up that way.
Right.
You know, so it happens in MMA. They just don't. They cover it up. MMA fighters get hurt. A larger percentage of MMA fighters get hurt, but boxing has a larger percentage of brain injuries than any other sport. You know, unless you're a guy like Lennox who gets out early.
Right. And you would think, when you hit that several millions mark, because here's Teofimo Lopez. It has nothing to do with brains, but well, okay, maybe it does.
Right.
But anyway, he's saying to Bob Arum, I should be getting $8-10 million a fight. Whereas our friend Eddie Hearn this week said, no, you should be getting $2 million a fight. You have to look at the analytics. You have to look beyond, your record and what the analytics are saying about your value to us as promoters and to our broadcasters. So it's a very interesting statement. And I'm pretty sure Teofimo Lopez didn't really enjoy those comments, but they had some validity. I mean,
no, absolutely. His ass is in the seats, and he draws an okay crowd for pay-per-view and a live crowd, but he's not the guy. I mean, he's beaten Lomachenko, and he's beaten a couple other name guys, but he's not must-see TV, and
right.
he's not filling out 60 to 80,000 seat stadiums where he can demand that. He can't say, if you're the promoter, you can't say, well, Graham, I'm getting 8 million pay-per-view buys. Okay, then I can pay you 10 million.
Right.
But if you say to him, no, you're getting 50,000 worldwide, you're not getting 10 million or 2 million. You got to earn it.
Yep.
And you earn it by fighting, not by talking.
Yeah, no irony, but that's basically what Eddie Hearn was saying. Stop your moaning and get in the ring and start fighting.
Yeah.
Because if there's one, I think he's had one fight this year, I think.
That's it. And I said before, Jake Paul fighting more guys
Right.
than world champions are. And, you look at some of these guys. I mean, a lot of people go see Fury when he fights to see him get beat, but they still pay to see him. That's
Right.
what the thing with Ali in his first incarnation. He was filling out stadiums because everyone wanted to see him get beat, but they still paid good money. When he fought at Wembley against Henry Cooper before he was champ, there were almost 100,000 people there. And Ali fanned the flames by walking in with a crown and a robe. He said, "You have a Queen of England, but you don't have a King of England. I'm the King of England, and I'm here to knock the Queen off her throne and tell you I didn't even train for Henry Cooper because Cooper's nothing but a bum, and I'm going to beat him easy." And people wanted to kill Ali, but that was the country they loved the most. So 100,000 paid to see him, but he won. As he said, it's not bragging because I back it up every time. And so Teofimo's not backing it up every time because Ali, when he won the title, fought all the time.
Yes.
And these guys didn't. And when you talk about the damage Ali got from when he wins the Olympics, so 60 and he wins the Olympics, and then 61 to 67, and he's fighting, he's getting hit maybe 60, 70 times a fight, maybe 15 times in the head per fight, if that.
Right.
Then he comes back in 71 and fights 9 years and has like 35, 40 fights where he's getting hit 250, 300 times a fight, and he's taken 150 to 200 punches in the head times 30, 35 fights. And if he hadn't been forced out, he wouldn't have been getting hit that much. But he paid the price. And they all do. Wilder, I mean, give people like you and me some credit. You can watch TV and see, okay, that guy's finished. You can hear that Berto and Roberto Guerrero Jr. are fighting each other. They're in their middle 40s. They're done. They're shot fighters. Shot fighters get hurt. Fighters will keep fighting until only Foreman stopped when his mother passed away. But fighters will keep fighting as long as you pay them.
Yep.
Ray Leonard said guys will fight and Duran will still fight if you paid him. And there needs to be a legal limit where you can't fight over a certain age, or you have to get a brain test. And a lot of times they'll say, well, we tested the brain and we didn't see any bleeds. Right, because he had a concussion and your brain was swollen, and you can't see anything when the brain's swollen. You got to wait till the swelling comes down.
And that's the difference between other major sports and what we're dealing with in boxing. Because if I had a management company or a promotional company, there would be a limit to the number of boxers I could actually manage and or promote. There'd be a limit, an actual physical number that I could, and my staff could promote. So as with any other professional sports organization, as in a league, you're given a cap of, say, I don't know, 30 million, 60 million, whatever your cap is. And if you don't make the team per se, you're not getting paid. In other words, and after a few years in the minors, you're out. Yeah. I mean, but there isn't that kind of limit for boxing. It's as long as there's money dangling at the end of the carrot stick there, you're going to go fight. You want that money, I don't think it's about titles either, quite frankly. None of the boxers we've talked to really care about the titles.
No, and they know who the best is. Out of the 100,000, not 100,000, but thousands and thousands and thousands of baseball players that get drafted each year and show up to major league training camps, one gets chosen.
Right.
That's it. And even that one has no guarantee. It's less. The guy from the Yankees told my friend's son it's less than 1 in 100,000. Right. Those are your chances of making it. So right. in boxing, let's say you have your own company, right? Maple Leaf Boxing. And you say, we have 30 employees and we have 20 fighters on staff. Like we have 20 fighters we're managing. And more people want to come in. And what we did at Lennox Lewis's company, Global Legacy, is if you wanted to join, great, but you had to have an extensive amateur pedigree. You couldn't just say, I feel like I could be a boxer. You had to have an amateur pedigree. You had to have fights on tape, and then we would look at you. and you would say to yourself, like Maple Leaf Boxing, I'm Graham Boyce, I run it. I like to see your amateur pedigrees. What amateur titles did you win? Well, I won the Northern Ontario Continental title. No.
Perfect.
Did you win an Olympic medal, a Commonwealth medal, Pan Am Games, or Golden Gloves? I didn't win any of those. Then we're not interested. Sorry, that's just the way it goes. Find another sport. Don't get hurt.
Yep.
But
Yep.
this attitude that, you could go to promoters today. I don't say anything to this guy because he looks like a tough guy. This guy online, I think Dana Feldman or something, but he promotes celebrity boxing. That's just stupid. Who cares? And you're just asking to get hurt.
I think one of our girls in America actually interviewed him. I forget his name.
Dana Feldman or something like
that. Celebrity boxing.
Yeah, I get stuff from him and other people, and we want to do this and we want to do that, and if you could write, I'm a boxing writer. I'm not going to write about celebrity boxing. Why? I don't care.
Right.
I'd rather let the world know about great Canadian boxers of the past and present. I don't care if someone from Facts of Life 2D is fighting B. Arthur's niece. Who cares? It's not going to change anything, and no one's going to pay to see it. But people will read. When I write my next book on George Godfrey, the original Black George Godfrey from PEI and his cousin George Budge Byers, who came from PEI in the 1880s and both became world champions. And the Black population there is infinitesimal now. Then it was less than nothing, and they still became the best in the world. So that's something people should know. But celebrity boxing is just a waste of time. Same as Ruddock and Roy Jones. I respect both of them, but your careers are over. You don't see Chuck Wepner coming back.
That's right. That's great. The way you throw in these names and I actually recognize them.
Yeah, I got to tell you a quick story. And I know the great thing about me is, as you know, Graham, more than anyone, I repeat all my stories. So if you miss it, you miss nothing. But my late friend, Jim Gentle, was the matchmaker at Global Legacy Boxing. And he was if not my closest friend in boxing, if not my closest friend in the world. He died last year. I think he was early 50s of cancer. He had a 10-year-old son.
Wow.
And I loved him. And I always told him I loved him. And so when I would talk to him, I would say, do you know that Johnny Coulon, former world bantamweight champion, was from Toronto, and he lived beside Mary Pickford, the movie star? And he said, you know what, Lou? You know what's great about that, aside from nothing at all? He said, what's really great about that is you and the other two people on this earth who know that will one day get together at a dinner and bore yourselves to death. What's wonderful about that? He said, you could write a book on that, and there's no machine to measure how little I would care. So, I come up with these arcane facts, but you're right. It's, we love boxing, and it's just, people that criticize. It's the same when you read something online and you go, you don't know anything about the sport. Where do you get off criticizing it?
Right.
It just kills me. Or when they say, Marciano retired because he was afraid to fight Liston. Liston was in prison during most of Marciano's reign. And when Liston was out, he had 3 fights. He wasn't even taken up by the mob at that point. Why would an unknown guy with 3 fights fight for Marciano? That makes no sense. But people don't want to listen.
I hear you. And Mary Pickford, by the way, even though she's from Toronto, moved to LA and founded United Artists with Douglas Fairbanks Jr., if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. And Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and
that's right.
America's sweetheart. And when they asked her why she went to New York to do Broadway and then to do the movies, she said, my family couldn't make a living acting in Canada. They didn't want to pay us. And Jimmy McLarnin, I got to speak to him twice, just before he died. He said, I fought in Vancouver in front of a sold-out stadium when I was 19, and they gave me $50. And they fought, they made hundreds of thousands in the late 20s. And then I go to New York, and I sell at Madison Square Garden, and you had to pay me a minimum $250,000 per fight. And these people in Canada are saying, why don't you come back and fight for us? We'll give you $75.
Right.
And his manager just said, you can't be that stupid. You're not going to sell a stadium for 60,000 people and pay us $75. Jimmy gets $250,000. There's no argument. That's it. You're going to pay it? No. Goodbye. And that's always been the way Canada is, especially in boxing. They don't want to pay for value.
Yeah. Same thing in the music industry. Look at the various artists who've gone south of the border to make their fame and fortune.
Mm-hmm.
So
same thing in stand-up comedy, which I always say is so similar to boxing, except you get more shots in the head in stand-up comedy than you do in boxing. But stand-up comedies run the same way. In the States, if you're in LA or New York, you could play any club you want. You could play every club all night, every night. Canada, when I did it, you could only play for Yuck Yucks. If you went there,
yeah, that's right.
That's right. And you had to make a living, but you can't down there. You could.
You take a look at all the comedians who have infested Hollywood, who are from actually actors in general, not just comedians.
Glenn Ford, Mary Pickford, Walter Pidgeon, who fought Jack Johnson, Jim Carrey. I mean, the list goes.
Mike Myers,
John Candy, Dan Aykroyd, also
Bob and Doug,
Marie Dressler from Coburg, Ontario, who had the first kiss on screen, and Max Sennett was from Montreal. I wrote a thing on my Substack this week. I posted an article, Once Upon a Time in the Prize Ring, on Canadian Bat Masterson, who was from Montreal. And no one knows that. And when he died, writing for the Morning Telegraph in New York in 1921, the very last thing he wrote in his typewriter, everyone in life is said to get the same amount of ice. The only difference is rich people get their ice in the summer, poor people get their ice in the winter. And if that's not getting screwed, I don't know what is. and the other comment he had, which I loved, was he said, I'm originally from Canada, and I've been to hundreds of countries all over the world. And the people said to me, have you ever really killed a man? I was said to have killed 30 men. I didn't, but I didn't deny it because it helps to have people think that when in Dodge City. But he said the scariest place ever was the United States. And when I asked him why, he said, because these are the stupidest people on the face of the earth, and they have access to guns. And that's a lethal combination.
Yes. Guns bad, fists good.
Yeah.
All right, Lou. That wraps us.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
By the way, you said a couple of weeks ago your book was being published by a new publisher now?
I have several publishers who are interested, and I'm leaning towards, I'm just hearing them out now.
Good.
And then I had a literary agent who said, I can't represent the one you just wrote, but the one on Godfrey and Byers, that one I would like. She said, that's perfect. 2 unknown great black athletes from Canada. And she said, I wouldn't have any problem getting that sold.
Awesome.
So I said, good. I just hope I have enough money till my current one gets picked up to last and pay my rent. That's all I'm concerned with now.
Ain't boxing beautiful. There you go.
Yeah. It's Canada. You got to show business. You got to walk before you can crawl.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Lou. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Be well.
Thank you. Remember to like, share, subscribe, fans.